Hello and welcome to the second of 3 lunchtime conversations from the Special Collections at London Metropolitan University, which are designed to throw a spotlight on just some of the wonderful primary source and archive material that's held here. For those of you who are not already familiar with us, we're based at the Aldgate campus of the university, and we look after, amongst other collections, the Archive of the Irish in Britain, the Library of the Trades Union Congress, otherwise known as TUC, the Frederick Parker collection of historic chairs and its attendant archive, and of course the university's own archive. We're open on Tuesdays, Thursdays and Fridays from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. and you can contact us and make an appointment to visit via our website, and we'll put the details in the Q&A. And you can also explore the collections and drill down into the content of each of the collections via our online catalogue. And again, we'll put those details in the Q&A. Now, today's conversation will focus on the most recently deposited collection, that of E&A Wates. Now, Wates was a family-run retail furnishing and interior design company that operated in South London for over 120 years. And today I'm delighted to introduce Roger Wates. Hello, Roger.
Good afternoon.
Who worked for the firm for the best part of 40 years, 31 years of which as managing director. So the form of today will be that Roger and I will chat for about 30 minutes, and then it's effectively over to you for a 15-minute question and answer session. Just to say also that we'll be posting an online feedback form in the Q&A, and any comments you may have, positive or negative, will be gratefully received. So, Roger, could I start by asking you to describe the company E&A Wates, so when and how it was formed and how the services it offered diversified over time?
Certainly, thank you, Peter. My grandfather had 6 sisters and 4 brothers. The eldest 2 of the brothers were Edward and Arthur, and that's why we've got E&A Wates, because it's named after them. In 1900, Edward found a shop in Mitcham Lane in Streatham to sell furniture. So this wasn't an immediate decision. As an 11-year-old boy, he was taken out of school because he had a hearing impediment. And why would you want to educate someone who got a hearing impediment? So his family took him out of school, sent him to become a fishmonger in Croydon. And it was after that that he took to furniture and was a salesman in a shop in Shepherd's Bush and then in Kennington. He wanted to form his own business, which, as I say, he did in 1900 in Mitcham Lane in Streatham. And his brother Arthur joined him a couple of years later. They had a single unit shop and that prospered. And they were selling new furniture, second-hand furniture, and indeed they traded in things like second-hand pianos and soft furnishings. So even at that stage, it was quite diverse. But they had 2 other brothers who had building experience. And when they decided to join the company, which was somewhere around about 1904, they decided that they'd build some properties. And so they built 2 properties in Purley, and that added to a pre-First World War total where they had something like 139 properties. And Wates, the furnishers, furnished those properties. Sometimes it was the show houses, but more often than not, it was the clients who bought the houses. So we did the removal of the client into the home, we restored their old furniture, and we set up their house with new furniture, often linoleum and rugs as well.
Right.
It was round about 1913 that they moved to their biggest premises, which was also on Mitcham Lane, and they had a 4-floor store there with an 80-foot frontage, so a lot of glass in order to have a lot of display. You asked about the diversity.
Yes.
Well, furniture was ascending throughout that period. We've got lots of early advertisements from 1902 onwards. And even some of the early ones talk about satin walnut bedroom suites for £5 or £6, you know. So we're very fortunate with the documentation of the company. And I have to say that the post-war diversification at the time of utility furniture, we then ended up selling things like fitted kitchens, radiators, I think, refrigerators, fan heaters, some electrical goods as well. But then they were dropped as we expanded from 1 store to 3, and we had very focused middle and top end furniture for sale. And it really carried on that way until we closed, which was obviously about 70 years later after we grew the businesses in the 50s.
Gosh, how dynamic, goodness me. If I might ask, I know you joined the family firm, I think I'm right, in 1985. Was that for you a natural progression to join the firm? You see where this is going. Or had you been thinking prior to joining of pursuing another career?
Well, which student doesn't agonize about what career they pursue? For me, I had done some holiday jobs in E&A Wates, and just to give you some context, at that stage, if you were doing maths A-level, you needed to provide your own scientific calculator. Well, I spent all of one particular year, 1976, and I earned the grand total of £34, and that was what a calculator costed in those days. So I had some background as to what it was like to work in one of those 3 shops. In fact, I worked in 2. And then I went to university and I got ideas about marketing, so industrial marketing with people like Unilever. But as it happens, in the end, I pursued a retail career with Marks & Spencer, and I went into commercial management with them for 3.5 years, worked in 5 different stores throughout the UK and head office, and then made the decision that if I was ever going to try the family business, it was going to be now. I was about 25 at the time and decided to give it 2 years. Well, I was at that stage store manager of our Tooting branch, and you get sucked into all the work that's going on managing the store. And as I was enjoying it, I never had a chance to reconsider that. So I spent my entire career with E&A Wates from that point on.
Goodness me. Well, carrying on the family note just for a little bit, another of our special collections, which I mentioned briefly at the start, the Frederick Parker collection of historic chairs and its attendant archive, encompasses the business archive of Parker Knoll, which is the company that Frederick Parker & Sons morphed into in the early 1930s. Parker Knoll obviously is still a very well-known designer and manufacturer of upholstered furniture, but a company no longer under the Parker family control. So, do you think that Wates was unusual in any way in remaining under family control for so long? And was there ever any threat of being taken over?
There was no threat of being taken over, as I'll explain in a moment, but it wasn't at all unusual for it to remain in family hands. The vast majority of small independent furnishers, of which so many towns around the country have 1 or 2, are businesses that go from one generation to another. And that's because it becomes a passion within the family. And if it's successful, the next generation want to come into it. And I think the only time it would go out of family hands and be taken over is if it's supremely profitable and there's a hostile bid for it. So you might see that today in the tech sector, when people, before even making a profit, they're onto an idea which is burgeoning, and other players in the field want to get on into it at the early stage. Whereas with a furniture company, I think the only time it would go out of family hands is if it's supremely profitable, or indeed if it's grown so well that the family needs to take a slight back seat and employ professionals outside of the family experience.
Sure. Now, I know you're passionate about education, and indeed this is reflected in your generous donation of material that's primarily intended for use for teaching as a teaching resource here at London Met itself. But can you say also a few words about your involvement in education elsewhere?
Yes, certainly. Just within E&A Wates, for example, before we go elsewhere, within the firm, we were very keen that the local population would know more about what we did, and that can only be achieved through education. So we brought during the festivals, we brought the local population in to see our workshops and be part of a workshop tour. So they could, for example, see a cabinet maker at work, or watch a caner caning a chair, or gilding a piece of furniture. And these were very important things, to smell a glue pot, for example, and experience
Well, not for too long.
experience life in the polishing shop. But all of these things gave the local population an insight into what we did. And that expanded through our interior design department. And we often had evening workshops for clients to come in and play with the concept of interior design, creating their own room sets. And indeed, we did that for young people as well. We had a really rather extraordinary weekend where young people were invited in. I might talk about that a bit later, but to do their own interior design for their bedroom. And in addition to that, we had a public series of lectures every year as part of the local festivals. We did a lecture to roughly 200 people. We did one on William Morris, on the Art Deco movement, on Georgian furniture. And I think one of the most interesting ones, which once again I might talk about later, but this poster on my right and your left is regarding Liberty of London and how they had a very strong connection with the local area. So we did an annual lecture on that. And I've also done workshops in schools as well. And outside of work, I'm a member of two livery companies, the Furniture Makers Livery and the Upholders Livery. These are ancient guilds, part of the City of London, and the Upholders is the traditional name or ancient name for upholsterers. So everything that E&A Wates was involved in is reflected in those two liveries. And within one, the Furniture Makers, I'm on the Frederick Parker Committee, another one of your archive collections. And six, roughly, of the 190 chairs that London Met houses go out to furniture making colleges in the country. So, for example, West Dean or Rycote Wood. And we go out there to talk about the six chairs and to present information about the Parker Knoll collection. And indeed, within the Upholders, we sponsor a lot of awards for very talented students within London Met, and more recently to the national collection of round about 500 people who are studying upholstery around the country at the moment.
Gosh, well. Now, the material that you've donated, you could say, is broadly in two parts. We've got the business archive, which we've mentioned, and a substantial collection of fabric and wallpaper samples, which is actually a comprehensive snapshot of all British designed and manufactured brands of wallpapers and fabrics, 2015 to 2020. It's a sort of little time capsule, if you like. Now, as I was assessing and processing your business archive material, the one thing of many that struck me was the really impressive length and breadth of your list of contract clients. So, for example, Shell. Was contract work per se an early feature of Wates? And if I may ask, with whom did you yourself particularly enjoy working, and why?
Right, okay. Well, I'd say that our contract work started in the very early days. So every house that Wates Construction built, E&A Wates managed to furnish. So that was already a strong corporate client providing a lot of facilities. But after the war, my father, Peter Wates, we've got records of him dealing with some of the other oil companies, Manchester Oil, Burma Oil, people like the Surrey County Council, Daily Telegraph. There's one or two other hospitals, for example. There's quite a lot, and that's just scratching the surface. More recently, we've done a lot of work for Shell, and we used to look after around about 260 of their properties they had through Surrey and London, and we used to furnish all of those. But in addition to that, we work with organisations like Hackett, the retailers. We work for them in over 30 countries and over 70 stores. People like the Houses of Parliament, where we upholstered all the benches in the ayes and nays corridor. That's the voting corridors. And in addition to that, some rather quirky contracts with people like the Royal Pavilion at Brighton, and the various organisations in and around Burlington House and the Royal Academy.
Gosh, and embassies and consulate buildings as well, a long list of those.
Well, yes, and that surprised me, because I've found that in the 1950s we dealt with the American Embassy, and likewise for many years I used to call on Winfield House in Regent's Park, which is the American ambassador's residence. And we were always preparing for the new incumbent, the new ambassador, or indeed a presidential visit. So the stakes were always
with a whole change of decor, I can imagine.
Well, keeping everything ship shape, that is for sure.
And another striking aspect of, may say, the business archive is a really often creative approach to marketing and, let's call it, company self-promotion. Something which is obviously of interest to our own students, you know, both at undergraduate and postgraduate level in marketing and business studies, but also in areas such as visual communications. So it's actually a very good target market for our own students, quite apart from any external visitors who would like to come and visit us. So, for example, you've mentioned the Liberty of London evening talks. What are your other particular favourites when it comes to those more creative approaches to pushing Wates forward, as it were?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I was looking at industrial marketing, or marketing for corporates, as potentially a career choice for me. So I think that seed must have been sown very early on.
Yes.
I remember doing a whole university presentation on Smith's crisps, for example, right in the early days. But I look back and think, well, my father had those genes and I inherited them from him, because when he took over the business in the late 40s, early 50s, he had spent 2 years working for Perrings, another very large multiple furniture retailer, and he'd organised their stands at the Ideal Home exhibition, and he learned a lot from that experience. But I think at that stage we weren't ready to go to the Ideal Home exhibition ourselves, which we did actually from 1985 onwards for about 12 or 13 years. But in the early stages, my father kind of set up this rival Ideal Home exhibition, which was held within our 3 stores, Streatham, Tooting and Upper Tooting. And he did some rather unusual things to promote it. For example, we had furniture pantechnicons, those huge vehicles used for moving furniture. He had one of them completely sign written to attract people to our own Ideal Home exhibition, which was on for a month, the same as that at Olympia. But even more bizarrely, he had a model helicopter made that was strapped to the top of the Pantechnicon. So when it drove around South London, it must have been staggering, a real eye catcher. But then he developed the idea, and he decided that on the flat roof of our Streatham store, he would make space for helicopter landing space available. The idea that he was attracting celebrities from all over the country to fly into Streatham to buy their furniture from.
Was it ever used? I don't know.
I doubt.
Just asking.
I think the idea was used, because if you look at St George's Hospital today, they've got a helipad on their roof. So, But in addition to that, he had a rather nice idea where the 4 glass showrooms at the front where it faced the street were almost blocked out. This is when televisions were coming into general viewership, and people were beginning to rent them from the first time from radio rentals. Well, he blocked off these windows in the shape of the surround of a television. So when you looked into the shop, you were looking through the screen, and he invented this range of furniture called Fernie Vision. In my day, however, the marketing was slightly different, and it was more about posters, flyers, merchandise that went into promoting an event. So there was hopefully a more tangible link with increasing our sales and in improving our reputation locally. So I've mentioned those workshops that we did throughout the company. But we generally attracted clients, and the two I want to tell you about is one was for a range of children's fabrics. And I generally didn't really like what was on the market until Villanova, who are a subsidiary of Romo, they launched a collection called Picture Book. And this was completely comprehensive with stickers, foils, fabrics, wallpaper, every conceivable thing that you might want to decorate a child's room. And I really liked the artwork. So I got to know the 2 out of the 3 artists behind them. And one of them lived locally in Brixton, one was in North London. So we invited them into the store for a weekend. And we gave them the chance to do drawing sessions with the young people of the area. We had storytelling sessions, book signings, because each of these artists had several books. We converted our workshop to an young interior designers studio where they could work with all these fabric samples to create their own bedroom. And that was probably chaos for the parents.
Yes, I can imagine.
But they loved it. And the other one was this bringing of our local area with Arthur Liberty and the connection with Merton. Now, I don't know if you know Merton Priory, but this is an ancient priory which closed as a result of Henry VIII. But prior to then, you've got the River Wandle with after then, with 50 mills on it. Arthur Liberty and William Morris both had workshops using the power of the River Wandle, and we gave a strong biography of Arthur Liberty and his connections with the Great Exhibition of 1851 and 1862, and how he changed the course of retail. And because of that local link, we wanted to enhance our connection with it. And we used Liberty fabrics on several ranges of upholstery. We had former staff come to the evening and show us their collections of photographs. And we had some live printing, block printing on display. So it was, should we say, it was a fulfillment of every side of our work in one evening event.
Oh, fantastic. We talked about business archive. Now, just turning our attention to the fabrics and the wallpapers, if I may. There's already been some quite considerable engagement with these by our students and external visitors. One of our students on the BA Textiles course has recently been quoted as saying that her engagement with the fabrics has significantly changed the course of her project work. And actually, she's also gone on to say that it's the ability to be able to be up close and personal with primary source material that is so crucial. And my question to you, Roger, in that regard is simply this. What in your opinion, is the use of this fabric part of the archive to students today?
Right. Well, I'll tackle the students today in just a moment, but let's look at students of the future. Because this is an archive. A fabric range usually lasts about 3 years. If it's particularly successful, it might be extended. And there are some fabrics which have gone on for years. I mean, we mentioned William Morris, but let's say William Morris willow pattern has never been out of fashion, for example. But what we've got is a snapshot of all the fabrics that we had on display at the time of closing in 2021. Now, that's interesting now because we've got at least 40 brands represented and many fabric books from each brand. So people can see comprehensively what was in fashion in our years that we are today. But imagine in 50 years' time, you're looking back at that, then that becomes even more valuable than today. But the relevance today is particularly for students that have been struggling online to visualize what a fabric looks like. In other words, what is its drapability? whether it's got a pile or a texture, and to understand that if it's got many different fibers within its composition, what does that actually feel like? So you could be looking at one pattern book, which are very, very expensive incidentally. Some of them cost £200 for us as retailers, but because they involve a huge amount of work. So you might have a collection of different colors, textures, designs that usually work very well together. So in one pattern book, an interior designer or someone interested in fabric technology can see a whole collection of the designer's thoughts as to what might be good in a room. And these are often highlighted with photographs throughout of not room sets here, but sets within clients' homes.
Yes.
And it really helps the client and the designer
student. Yes.
imagine what these collections could look like. Add to that, you might have, say, half a dozen books from one particular supplier, like Osborne and Little, Colfax and Farrell's often, and you can see that they're using the same color palette over a variety of collections. So you begin to get a brand identity, and you might think, well, perhaps your client would want to be a Sanderson client or a Zoffany client, or any of the other makes we work. Apart from that, each pattern book is an incredible resource for what goes into a fabric. So it might have the country of origin of the fabric, all the different fibers used to make up the fabric, whether it's a commercial or domestic, what the rub test is on the fabric, what the flame retardancy potential is, because some of them can't be made flame retardant because of high synthetic content. So in actuality, there's a whole universe of information that's in each pattern book, which is very hard to really understand if you're just scrolling through collections online. It really helps the fabric come alive.
Absolutely. Well, as we are approaching, I think, the end of the 30-minute slot that we've been allocated, one more question, if I may, and that's from your own experience. How do you think retailing in your area, in your sort of subject area, so to speak, has changed over time? And in particular, what has been the impact of shopping online, in your opinion?
Okay, well, this might be a slightly depressing conclusion, but anyway, let's just work through it briefly.
Let's not make it depressing.
No, we'll okay, we'll talk about this. Right, okay. So retailing has always faced competition, hasn't it? You've got other stores doing what you do. Then you're competing against the multiples. Then it's the out-of-town shopping centres taking people away from the high street. And then more recently, you're competing against competitors online. So you have done your best in your store to create a dramatic display. You might have a bit of theatre going on in the store. You've got great sales staff. You've spent lavishly to keep the premises looking smart. And you've assembled in front of you, which is no small task, a huge collection of what you think is interesting and engaging furniture and accessories from all over the world. Okay, and then you're up against an online retailer who can do a small amount of what you do, but really well. So they can hone in on one particular brand. They have all the brand on display online, and they can sell it at a discounted price, which a shop can't do. We've seen how shops disappear over time because they're being undercut on the internet. Bookstores, for example, it's classic. But I have to say that is very much the same. Plus the fact the law is weighted against them. So in other words, a client can randomly order a sofa online. It could be made bespoke for them, but they've got 2 weeks to reject it for any reason at all. So that is a big advantage that online retailers get, those who are offline. And it costs a lot of money. So it's a big investment to be online. You have a whole tech department, and that's something that's usually out of reach for smaller competitors. So a smaller competitor would compete with that by having great education amongst their staff, a lovely welcoming environment, and a good reputation. But even then, clients can come into the store, spend staff's time looking at fabric, and then saying, right, I've got a note of what I want, and going online.
I know what I want now, I'll go online.
So that is quite depressing, but it's not the end of the story. There are thousands of great retailers out there, and they are supported by a loyal local customer base who want to deal with an individual and who don't want to deal with a nebulous company online who might in the end not be so reliable and haven't got that personal service.
Absolutely. That's really very, very wise words, with which I concur entirely from personal experience, my dad. Roger, thank you very much indeed for our chat. That was really informative. Thank you so much. I'm now going to defer to our floor manager with questions from the Q&A department.
If you do have questions, the Q&A section is active. So for me, we talked about how the fabrics themselves support a lot of the creative students, but London Metropolitan University also have courses around business management, marketing and advertising. So are there any sort of top tips you can give to our students who are looking to understand how to set up a business and how important history, continuity, branding, marketing, all of those elements are, and why archives in that context are really important?
Most certainly. As I've made clear, I love the marketing side, and we were behind hundreds of advertisements over the years, creation of posters, flyers and brochures. All of those played a huge part in our era. Nowadays, you might want to advertise more online on Facebook and LinkedIn, and those visual representations of your company are really important. If you decide to go down the line of bricks and mortar as well as an online presence, then you have to create a buzz. Mary Porter's talked about theatre within retail, and Andrew Martin is a magnificent exponent of theatre within their showrooms. So I rather think you have to fire on all cylinders. If you've got a store, then the products that you're promoting, be it reupholstery, where you can always have things on display in a state of not done, partially done, completely restored. You can have curtains on display, which create sense of drama. All of these things can be done creatively, and it's about building excitement and interest within your friends, relatives, local residents, everyone that you see as part of your target base, and then buying into wider things. So, for example, we did over 35 shows at the decorative textile, the decorative fair in Battersea Park, which is 3 times a year. That's a great interface between antiques and interior design. We were at the Ideal Home Exhibition for 13 years, and all of these help you get into the mindset of a wider audience. So I think marketing is really important. It's about, you've got the great idea, but it's about letting people know. And there's lots of contemporary ways and traditional ways to achieve that.
And I'll just add to that the business archive that we now privileged to have contains examples, in fact, comprehensive examples of all of the said flyers, leaflets, posters. They're so attractive. I mean, even just from an aesthetic point of view, let alone the sort of the messages that they might carry. And I should also say that the online catalogue, I mentioned it at the start, there's a lot of detail there, not just about E&A Wates, but the other collections as well. And you can really use that as a tool to drill down. And can I also add at this point, just while it occurs to me, Roger is actually going to be delivering one of the 2 Frederick Parker collection lectures this year at Furniture Makers Hall, which is the home of the livery company, the Worshipful Company of Furniture Makers. The lectures are taking place on Thursday, the 14th of March. And you're able to book a place there if you navigate to the Worshipful Company of Furniture Makers website. That's going into the Q&A. I've got the thumbs up about that. Thank goodness for that. And I think it starts at 6 o'clock.
Absolutely. It's an early start, 6 p.m. And those people coming for the 2 lectures only, each lecture is 45 minutes. So it's not a long part of your evening. So it should be good fun. And I will expand significantly on what I've said today and some of the fascinating history which we haven't had time to reveal today.
Yes, I have attended myself Frederick Parker lectures in the last 3 years, I think, and they're always great value, and I'd highly recommend it. So do find your way to the Worshipful Company of Furniture website.
Right, we have another question. So how has the donation of the archive and collaboration with the university changed your, Roger's perception of the importance of business archives? And what advice would you give current business owners in relation to looking after their company record?
Oh, that's a good one.
That's an amazing question. And particularly because there are some people in our industry that get to the end of the life of their company and think that what they've got has of no value.
Yeah.
And that's really sad when it's dispensed of without any thought. As it happens, I had an early meeting with Kathy from the collection by chance at a drinks reception at Furniture Makers Hall. And she told me about the archive that you had here. And a little seed was sown in my mind that ultimately the university may find it of interest. I think it's incredibly important, and I think one of the best things about our donation was not necessarily what we've achieved or our clients or all the records that we've given you, which everything from order books to sales books to advertisements, trade publications, literally everything from World War II onwards is with you, or still at my home. But you can't underestimate the other thing that we gave, which was furniture brochures from 1948 onwards. So this, once again, we've got a snapshot of 5 years of fabrics, but this is 70 years of nearly every company's supplier, manufacturer's brochure from that time to now. And that's every brand that you might be thinking that we would have traded with.
I also like to thank, if I may, at this juncture, the National Archives. We were very fortunate in receiving a generous grant towards, let's say, the saving of the Wates, if I may put it that way, business archive. We had a substantial amount of money towards transportation costs and conservation materials, which in layman's terms means acid-free archive boxes, of which there were hundreds. So we'd like to thank the National Archives very much for their generosity under a COVID-19 fund, actually. So it's very, very generous. Thank you very much indeed. Roger, thank you very much indeed for coming.
Great pleasure, Peter. Thank you.
Looking forward to the Frederick Parker lecture for next week.
Excellent. Next Thursday.
Oh, we have another question.
A late entry.
Late entry.
So, how do customers react when things play out?
Displaying everything in room sets was really important to us. So we had 4 window displays and we changed those every month. Clients would walk by on the street, see what we'd put together, often liked it, or even they were driving past and they saw something they liked and would come in and buy it. We've had this on numerous occasions. I can think of one sofa in particular where we had a mulberry flying ducks fabric. I don't know, it's one of their trademark fabrics. And this person was going past on the bus. She came in the next day and said, I love that fabric. It means everything to me. And then she told me what it meant from her own personal experience of flying ducks and
Yeah.
anyway, we can't go into that now, it's too long. But she bought it on the spot. So that was displayed within a room set. We have 4 floors, and on each floor there was usually about 3 rooms. Each room was displayed in a room set, and then a lower ground floor the same. So it was really important, and it meant that people could imagine things in their own home. Nowadays, there's some fantastic software packages where you can see the sofa you want online, select what fabric you want, put the dimensions of your room in, and hey presto, you can see that sofa in your room. Now that's great. It's huge progress, but it doesn't necessarily give you an insight into anyone else's ideas but your own.
Yes.
So by using a showroom in someone else's concept of a room set, it helps you broaden your ideas.
So did you have an in-house, let's call it a stylist, to actually create these, or was it you, or was it?
Well, I ran the company for many years with a joint managing director, E&A Wates, and once we'd worked a full day, which is often 10 or 12 hours, we'd then get some chips from over the road and start the displays in the new window. So we had help from our removals department, moving the furniture into situ, but we would lay it out, we'd agonize over inches, we'd fight over accessories, but in the end we had we did it ourselves, and then towards the end we had an interior designer, and she had to play some input reluctantly because she was always involved in projects in doing some window work as well.
And you sort of refreshed quite regularly?
Every 4 weeks we would change each window.
Good gracious.
Yeah, a lot of work.
Oh my.
But then that was it was a lot of work, but it meant that you were never stale.
No.
And we were always representing furniture which we thought was edgy or unusual, very contemporary, or indeed hyper traditional. At Christmas we used to have 2 Christmas displays. One that I do, which is really traditional, and then one that our interior designer did, which was like a black Christmas tree with silver decorations, which filled me with horror.
Do you have any more questions? Right.
Great.
Roger, thank you so much. That was great fun.
That's a great pleasure.
Really
Thank you. Really enjoyed it too.
So the third and final conversation is due to take place on Wednesday, the 17th of April at 1 p.m. again. And when my colleague Jeff Howarth will be in conversation with Nick Pollard about one of the, what shall we say, headliners of the TUC library collection, which is to say the collection of the Federation of Worker Writers and Community Publishers, which is getting a lot of traction and interest at the moment. That was donated to the TUC collection by Nick and his colleagues in 2014. So we very much hope that you'll join us for that, booking via the Eventbrite system. And from Roger and myself, have a nice rest of the day and goodbye.
Cheerio. Bye-bye.